Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Breakfast Special.
Welcome to The Breakfast Show's Environment Special Climate Connections. Strong winds, sub-zero temperatures, and a climate drier than the Sahara Desert. Few places boast conditions as inhospitable and harsh as Antarctica, but that did not deter celebrated British polar explorer Robert Swan, who became the first man to walk unassisted to both the North and South Poles by the time he was 33 years old. Inspired by a daring age of Antarctic exploration, Robert had followed in the footsteps of his heroes, the men who risked and lost their lives to reach the South Pole. Back then, some 40 years ago, the effects of climate change were already apparent.
My dad was the first person to ski to the North and South Poles in the 80s, the first human to do that. So in 1984, they found the hole in the ozone layer. And so Dad was down there when that science was happening. And so when he was skiing, his eyes and his face blistered because of the hole in the ozone layer, and they didn't know why, because they were reading Captain Scott and Amundsen's journals, and they never mentioned faces being blistered and eyes being so sore. So he was there when NASA was figuring out that there was a hole in the ozone layer.
All of that changed Robert Swan's life forever. On that first expedition, the prolonged exposure to ultraviolet light during parts of the trip which were directly under that ozone layer hole permanently altered his eye color from dark blue to light blue. Some years on, his team nearly drowned at the North Pole due to the premature melting of glaciers in the Arctic. These two hard-hitting and unexpected incidents spurred him to launch a 50-year mission, 2041, a non-profit dedicated to preserving Antarctica as a natural reserve and resource for science. For Robert, these experiences made fighting climate change a priority, if not a life mission, and that inspired Barney Swan to follow in his father's footsteps.
And in 2017-18, we pulled together an expedition, 2-month expedition of skiing to the South Pole powered on renewable energy. So I think I was very curious about his story and his legacy of being down there, but we wanted to do something that was different and relevant to the modern world, which is obviously renewable energy and the energy transition, the just transition, nature positive. All of these things are up and coming compared to him in the 80s, where sustainability wasn't really as much of a conversation. And so we wanted to create an expedition together that honored that analog, which fundamentally inspired him with the people in 1905, the first explorers to go to Antarctica, and then really do something together that honored the future. So that analog and digital coming together. My dad is 68 this year, I'm 30 this year, two very different generations. And so it was really beautiful to come together and have a shared journey and a shared celebration of what is possible, and to actually have the courage to make your own mark, but to collaborate with our ancestors, with our family. It's been a big healing journey for me to do that with Dad, and I think that that was a big part of why we've collaborated on 11 different expeditions to Antarctica over the last 15 years.
Just like Robert, Barney too possesses that same adventurous streak deep down. In 2017, Barney became the first person to walk the South Pole powered only by renewable energy.
It was 2 months of skiing, pulling a sled, skiing for 9 hours a day, pulling a 110 kilo sled. So that was the big expedition, 1,000 kilometer ski expedition in 2017-18. But I actually went there when I was 7, which was very crazy to be sailing down there as a kid, being sick on a boat. Like it was very hard to be going down there so young. But I went there when I was 7 and then also 18. And I think just being down there at 7, I remember the purity of it. It's the animals aren't scared of you, the whales aren't scared of you, the seals aren't scared of you. There's a purity to that place because the animals don't have to worry about humans, because most of the time they're not there. So they kind of just look at you like a big ugly penguin and don't really care. And I always remembered that sense of purity of Antarctica, and it remains a pure place. There's not that much rubbish down there. Like it's a very, I think the essence of what a global commons should be, a very pure biodiversity hotspot. And especially going down there at 7, it captivated my imagination.
Through 2041 Foundation, the Swans lead 3 to 4 polar expeditions each year, bringing together individuals, corporations, and even industries to discuss issues surrounding the environment and polar regions, as well as promote the use of renewable energy and sustainable practices.
Basically, between 2041 and 2049, we decide whether or not we abolish the treaty that protects Antarctica, and then there's all this land grabbing and chaos and mining and real estate and the usual stuff that we've done everywhere else on the planet. And so Dad's mission, 2041, which is a shared mission, is to make sure that we leave that as a land for science and peace. And an example of that is next year we're going to be creating a program called Allies for Sustainability, where we bring both industry leaders, transformative artists, indigenous people, smallholder farmers on an expedition, and we go down to visit Antarctica and we discuss both the problems, but we mainly discuss the solutions. And I think it's important, like I guarantee, and I don't know, but I assume there's not many farmers in this room. I don't know how many First Nations traditional owners there are in this room. I don't know how many refugees are in this room. And they're the 3 really important people to be having in this room to make this conversation and what decisions are made in rooms like this at Ecosperity, which is a fantastic event, how that is relevant for our future and how these decision makers can make a safety net for our future. And in our own small way, Allies for Sustainability is an example and an opportunity for people to come together and discuss what does that safety net look like and what part the different industries and sectors play within that.
Barney's passion for the environment runs as deep as his father. In 2018, Barney founded his own global non-profit, Climate Force, with a 7-year mission to reduce 360 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions before 2025 by making sustainable development solutions accessible, relevant, and engaging. One of his brainchilds, Tropical Regen, a biodiversity protection and restoration initiative. Under that pilot, Barney and his team are currently working to regenerate a rainforest corridor in Queensland's Daintree, the oldest rainforest system in the world.
Climate Force, which is the charity that I manage in Australia, we're continuing to plant trees organically, restore big areas of land and figure out how we can diversify monoculture, so palm oil, rice, cattle, cane, lots of monocultures out there, how we can diversify that to be regenerative agriculture. Not saying we don't need those commodities, but how can we have diversity in that cropping to support the farmers and to support the planet, because a lot of agricultural practices hurt the planet right now, especially synthetic chemicals like fertilizer, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides. They hurt nature. That's what they're designed to do. They dominate it so the crop or the livestock can thrive. And so that's my focus. And then working both in the rainforest and Antarctica, Dad and I come together.
A lot of what Barney is doing today is driven by what he personally saw in Antarctica.
And so I have many scientists speaking in my ear right now, being like, look at the long-term empirical data, Barney. Don't use your objective human perspective of only being down there a short time. And so I'll do both. The science is telling us that Antarctica is changing. Antarctica is an amazing place because of the ice core samples. We can look, much as when you cut a tree, you see the rings, and the rings tell a story of how much rain, how much drought, what's happening in that story of that tree. Much like Antarctica, you do an ice core sample, the bubbles tell you how much CO2 has been in the atmosphere. On 1.4 million years of bubble history, we've never gone over 350 parts per million, and now we're 421 parts per million. And so for me, that's irrefutable evidence of what we're doing as a species to our planet. Yes, if you look at the long term, it's like a slow breath cycle, up and down and up, and it's quite even, but up and down, about 14,000 year cycles, and then boom, explodes, industrial revolution. And I think that the long-term data is telling us that, there was an ice carving 2 years ago that was 5,000 square kilometers. Singapore is 725 square kilometers. So we're talking about bits of ice that dwarf Singapore as a country falling into the ocean. I've seen these bits of ice. And then as a personal perspective, like I've been down in Antarctica when it was raining. It shouldn't rain in Antarctica. I was sitting there and I'm like, got my ski jacket, like my polar, and it's raining. That's a big warning sign. that it's raining in Antarctica. It should be snowing. And so that's a huge wake-up call. When we were down there 2018, and it was the hottest day ever recorded in Antarctica whilst we were down there.
Experiences like this further firm up Barney's desire to preserve the fragile natural world and to educate and inspire others, particularly the next generation of decision makers, to do the same.
I think it's interesting that we were at an event recently and we asked the group of people, how many of you know that the hole in the ozone layer is fixing itself? Not a single person put up their hands because it's good news. If it was the hole in the ozone layer is 10 times worse, we're all doomed, it would be on the news because negative news leads. And we address CFC gases, we have healed the hole in the ozone layer, and that's a good news story. We've stopped hunting as many whales, now the whale population is coming back. That's a good news story. You know, there's so many good news stories out there, but so often the big media focuses on the negative stuff instead of the solutions. And as a result, not just young people, but many people are feeling really anxious and really sad and really depressed about the state of the future and what can I do as one citizen with 8 billion people consuming and $100 trillion moving around the world every year. What can I do as one person? But I think that it's not about false positivity, but it's about being pragmatic. Having conversations like this, engaging in your businesses, helping the elephants, helping rural communities, engaging with an open heart. There's so much that we can do to channel grief into action. And I think the ozone layer is a prime example of that. That was a problem. We addressed it as a species, and much like climate change, much like pollution, much like many of the planetary boundaries that we're breaching, we're innovators as a species, and we can solve so many of these things, both through working with nature and also through good innovation. And I think explorers can be communicators of provisions and the necessity to protect and to preserve and to innovate our economies to make sure that we regenerate what is lost and honor what we still have left.
Money